All right, everyone, now that Iowa is over, we look forward to New Hampshire. By the way, I should announce right away, yes, I will be going live for the New Hampshire primary. I expect this to be about as formulaic as Iowa. Now that we know that the scattershot of polling is reasonably within the margin of error, it's difficult to imagine with Ramaswamy and Burgum both endorsing Trump, fresh off of a major win, a historic win. He won by a larger margin than any other person in the Iowa caucus history, by the way. Donald Trump did. With that, and with Haley taking third in Iowa instead of clinching second and doing reasonably well, which was her hope, as reflected by her speech thereafter, talking about it now being a two-person field. That was written for a scenario in which she came in second, and effectively Ron DeSantis, who put all of his eggs in one basket in Iowa, had to drop out. Though he probably would endorse Trump at that point, which would be a big goddamn hassle for her. Looking at New Hampshire, therefore, I suspect that Trump will win. I suspect that he'll have more than the 41 he's at in the aggregate. Vivek Ramaswamy and Doug Burgum combined could get him to 46 maybe or thereabouts. So you're looking at the upper 40s, probably mid to upper 40s, while Haley probably stays down around the low to mid 30s. So I expect there to be a double-digit gap of victory. DeSantis will probably drop out after New Hampshire because he's at risk of coming in the single digits, actually. We'll have to wait for more polling. And then that's the other thing. In the next week before the primary, we're going to get several more polls. I'm hoping we get 3 or 4 like a couple days before, because then we can have one final scattershot. It is important to note that Trump has never been behind in any poll in New Hampshire. The Haley surge thing is simply because she started crawling up in the aggregate there in the wake of Ron DeSantis' decline, which is a nationwide decline overall. But now it's more or less stabilized. She doesn't appear to be rising any further. I think that she faces a hard ceiling. The problem is this. Most Republicans at this point support populism, not the old neocon tradition. Before, of course, when Christie was in the race, he was vote sharing to some degree, but I think most of that was just the generic TDS stuff. That doesn't necessitate that they go to Haley. Maybe the pragmatists, but the more hardliners probably go with Ron DeSantis, because some TDS sufferers are MAGA. I don't know why they'd be supporting Christie in the first place, but I can't imagine that she gets that entire boost. Again, with Ramaswamy out and endorsing Trump and DeSantis at least existing in the state of New Hampshire, along with Asa Hutchinson, I guess. No new updates on him. Everyone's awestruck that he's still in the race. He thought he would make up his mind after Thanksgiving whether there were a path forward. He's running at 0 in most of the polls, whether he's polled for at all. I don't know. Something's batshit about that dude. Anyway, in a 3-person race, I think that Trump grabs it. I think that the win in Iowa will demoralize some Haley supporters. I think it will give him an aura of invulnerability because of the margin of victory. You're about to have a fresh news slurry. It's all going to be about Donald Trump. Nobody's even going to be discussing these others except in the terms of them having lost. That's going to breathe even more air into the furnace that is powering the Trump train. I think that he could probably win in the low 40s, actually. But we're not sure. With Christie out of the race, we do need new polling. Even if Haley were to clinch a win there, it would be by an underwhelming margin, and it wouldn't really help her when you go into your own home state with a 35-point deficit. I don't think South Carolina voters, oddly enough, are as amenable towards neocon Nikki as people in a different state, which is, again, the result of New Hampshire politics being a little on the odd side. Also, you got to realize, much like with Ron DeSantis spending all of his time and money in Iowa and underperforming. He did come in second. Again, very helpful. Thank you very much. I refuse to insult you from here on out. But he didn't win the state, despite putting all effort there. His entire political ambitions rested in that one state. Haley has done that with New Hampshire. If she underperforms by a couple points in the polls, and her turnout did seem a bit depressed, Trump's did not. If we see a repeat of that in the state of New Hampshire, especially because moderate voters, they're less inclined to vote now, aren't they? They can only vote based on fear of extremism or something like that, not necessarily in all cases for the candidate being some upstanding person. Any combination of different factors, the endorsements of Burgum and Ramaswamy buoying him up, getting buoyed up by his win in Iowa, Haley supporters simply being less likely to vote, they're less enthused, and polling does show that as well, means that she wouldn't win. She would get edged out by Trump, again, possibly by a low double-digit margin. she would drop out. She's not going to go into South Carolina and get completely humiliated in her home state. In the absence of Haley, I suppose DeSantis could feasibly stay in and gobble up the remnant TDS vote. But again, Super Tuesday calling. It might be fine to go through Nevada and South Carolina without Haley there. You ride into the 30s, maybe even the low 40s. But come Super Tuesday, you've got Florida. And he's 30 some odd points behind in his own home state. The two of them, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, fundamentally would be insane to go into their own home states and lose. It would end their political careers. Now, whether they're crazy enough to do that remains anyone's guess. Ron DeSantis, of course, has no reason to drop now because he came in second in Iowa, so he's viable. Haley has no reason to drop out because she's riding high in New Hampshire because that's where she's focused all her effort. If she doesn't win, she has effectively wasted over $100 million in ads alone in that one small state, which also canvasses Vermont. Thanks, Nikki, for being on the TV 20 times a day, by the way. It's just exactly what I need for my energy and my good spirits, my good health, and my mental health. Then she's toast. If she underperforms in any way or Trump outperforms, that's the race. Again, in polling, Haley's aggregate is still far lower than Donald Trump's. It's not as low as like the aggregated polling for other candidates was in Iowa. It's not that big a gap. But again, if the polling is to be believed, and it was certainly accurate in Iowa, and you have no further movement, and I can't imagine that you will, how is she supposed to escape the 30s? It's probably impossible, especially with Ramaswamy and Burgum now going with Trump. Ramaswamy did have a small fan base, but it was very hardened. His fan base is a fairly hardened fan base. Most of his voters do not have TDS. Who are they going to vote for? Probably the dude that Ramaswamy endorsed. It's sort of like when Rand Paul dropped out in 2016. I had supported Rand Paul. He endorsed Trump, and I said, okay, it's good enough for me. That puts me over the edge. I'm on the Trump train. Except when he chose Mike Pence as his VP for a brief period of time there, I was riding with the Libertarians, but then I realized that Gary Johnson's batshit too, so I went back to the Trump train. I think I chose well. So the primary looms. My expectation is another Trump victory. It will be by a smaller margin than in Iowa, but I think that any momentum genuinely towards Haley has been blunted by a third-place finish in Iowa. We saw a lack of enthusiasm there, and I can't imagine that it doesn't translate over to New Hampshire. If anything, when you pump the state with 20 or 30 ads a day, people get tired of it. Sometimes things are better in slightly smaller quantities. You overload people with the ads, it just makes you look fucking desperate. Which is what Haley is. The Uniparty's desperate to astroturf her as the Trump replacement so they can go back to the Bush era. That's about all. Peace out.